Welcome to the West Wing Week, your guide to everything that's happening at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and across the ocean. This week, the president traveled to Turkey, the Philippines, and Malaysia. He met with world leaders at the G20 summit in Antalya and APEC leaders in the Philippines. That's November 13th to November 19th, or crossing every time zone. On Friday, the president expressed our solidarity with the French people after terrorists attacked their capital city. The dialogue on our efforts to combat ISIL continued through the weekend when the president crossed the Atlantic on his way to Turkey, the first stop on his 10-day trip to Asia. One 10-hour flight later, the president arrived at the ripe hour of 6:56 a.m., where he began a full day of meetings with world leaders. First, he met with the host country's President Erdogan. Then he took a family photo with the G20 leaders, and later held a bilateral meeting with King Salman of Saudi Arabia. On Monday, the president continued his whirlwind of meetings. He kicked it off with a meet and greet with local embassy staff, then onto the G20 summit. In the afternoon, he met with 4 European leaders from the UK, Germany, Italy, and France. And later, the president held a news conference where he answered questions about the terror attacks in Paris and how the United States and the 65 members of the coalition we lead will further intensify our efforts to degrade and ultimately destroy ISIL. On Tuesday, the president flew another 11 hours to reach the Philippines. Soon after Air Force One touched down in Manila, the president was off to the port of Manila to inspect a ship that once was part of our Coast Guard, until we provided it to the Philippine Navy to shore up maritime security in the South China Sea. Then the president held a bilateral meeting with the Prime Minister of Australia. Wednesday kicked off another meeting and press conference, this time with the host country's President Aquino. Later, the president spoke with enthusiastic business leaders in the Asia Pacific that are dedicated to making an impact in the global challenge to combat climate change. That afternoon, the president and other APEC world leaders took a family photo before a meeting about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's a new trade agreement that will level the playing field for American workers and American businesses. The president capped off a busy day with a group photo before sitting down to dinner and a cultural performance. On his final day in Manila, the president headed into his last round of meetings with APEC world leaders to discuss regional integration and the global economy. He followed that up with 2 one-on-one meetings, the first with Canada's new Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, then Prime Minister Abe of Japan. It's been a busy cross-continental week, so stay engaged with us online, and remember, you can find out more information about any of these topics and see complete videos of these events at whitehouse.gov. So thanks so much for checking out this edition of your West Wing Week, and stay tuned next week when the president's journey in Asia concludes in Kuala Lumpur.
Good to see you. Good to see you. I like your bow tie, man. That's really sharp. How are you?
Our name is Sasha.
Is your name Sasha? I've got a Sasha at home. That's a great name. That's a great name. All right, guys. See you, everybody.